Welcome to Elizabeth's Chronicles. If you love stories like this one, tap that subscribe button. Today we are going to look into the Jodi Arias case. Jodi Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California, to parents, William Angelo and Sandy S. Arias. She has one older half-sister, one younger sister, and two younger brothers. According to Arias, she was physically abused by both parents from around 7 years old. She claimed, both her parents used to beat her with belts and wooden spoons. She enjoyed photography from an early age, and was very talented at it. Her interest in photography led her to pursue it as a profession and take up several part-time jobs as professional photographer. She attended Wairika Union High School but dropped out in the 11th grade. She earned her GED later on. She took on a job as a server, at a restaurant in California, located at Ventana Inn and Spa, in Carmel, in the fall of 2001. She met the restaurant's food and beverage manager, Darryl Brewer, and they started dating in 2003. Arias and Brewer bought a house in California's Palm Desert, and they both paid half on the mortgage payment of $2,800 each. In February of 2006, she started working for prepaid legal services. She continued working at the restaurant as well. She increasingly became more involved with prepaid legal services, and her relationship with Brewer dwindled. At the same time, she started defaulting on her part of the mortgage payments that she had arranged with Brewer. The two broke up in December 2006, however, they did stay in touch as friends. During that time, in September 2006, she was introduced to Travis Alexander, a salesman and motivational speaker for prepaid legal services, at the company's conference, in Las Vegas, Nevada. Alexander was a Mormon. According to Arias, they began a sexual relationship within a week of first meeting. Travis Victor Alexander was born on July 28, 1977, in Riverside, California, to Gary David Alexander and Pamela Elizabeth Morgan Alexander. At the age of 11, Travis moved in with his paternal grandparents. When his fathers died in July 1997, his 7 siblings also moved in with their paternal grandmother. Arias began going to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where Alexander was a member, and was baptized by him, on November 26, 2006 in a ceremony in Southern California. Alexander and Arias began dating in February 2007. Arias moved to Mesa, to be closer to Alexander. In April 2008, she moved to Wairika, California, and lived there with her grandparents. Alexander and Arias dated on and off for a year and a half, taking turns traveling between Arizona and California homes to see each other. Alexander's friends who met Arias, and observed them together, had a negative opinion of her, stating that the relationship was unusually strained and that Arias' behavior was troubling to them. In the early months of 2008, Alexander told friends that Arias would be accompanying him for a work-related trip to Cancun, Mexico, scheduled for June 15. However, in April, he removed Arias as his travel companion, and added another female. After the breakup, Alexander began seeing other women. According to Alexander's friends, Arias began stalking Alexander. She hacked his Facebook and slit his tires. On May 28, a burglary occurred at Arias' grandparents' home, which is where Arias was actually living. A few items were stolen, as well as a .25 caliber handgun. Arias set out to drive south, to rent a car for a long trip to Utah. She purchased gasoline in Wairika. On June 2, at 8:04 a.m., Arias rented a car, in Redding, California. She advised she would return the car in Redding. Arias then visited friends in Southern California on her way to Utah for a work conference, and to meet with Ryan Burns, a co-worker. By late evening on June 3, Arias apparently set out for Salt Lake City. Alexander didn't make an important conference call on the afternoon of June 4. The next day, Arias met Burns in the Salt Lake City suburb of West Jordan, Utah, and the two attended meetings for the conference. In an interview later, Burns said he noticed Arias' blonde hair was now dark brown, and that she had cuts on her hands. On June 6, she departed Salt Lake City, and headed west towards California. She attempted to call Alexander numerous times, and left several voicemail messages for him. She also accessed his cell phone voicemail. When Arias returned the rented car on June 7, she had put about 2,800 miles on the car. The clerk at the rental store testified that the car was missing its floor mats, and had odd red stains on both front and back seats. It could not be determined if the car had floor mats when Arias picked it up, and the red stains could not be verified because the car was thoroughly cleaned before police could examine it. On June 9, when Alexander's friends couldn't reach him, they went to his home. He had not been seen for several days. They initially believed he was out of town, so they didn't think anything was wrong. After locating a key to Alexander's master bedroom, his friends entered, and found large pools of blood in the hallway to his bathroom, where they found his body in the shower. In the 911 call, the dispatcher asked if Alexander had been suicidal or if anyone was angry enough to hurt him. Alexander's friends named Arias as a possible suspect, advising that Alexander had said she was stalking him, accessing his Facebook account, and slashing his car's tires. While police searched Alexander's home, they discovered his recently purchased digital camera damaged in the washing machine. However, the memory card was still accessible. They were able to recover deleted images showing Arias and Alexander in sexually suggestive poses. The images were time-stamped and dated, proving they were taken at 1:40 p.m. on June 4. The last photograph of Alexander alive, showing him in the shower, was taken at 5:29 p.m. that day. Photos taken just a few minutes later show Alexander bleeding out on the bathroom floor. A bloody palm print was found on the wall in the bathroom hallway. It contained DNA from both Arias and Alexander. Travis Alexander sustained 27 to 29 stab wounds, a slit throat, and a gunshot wound to the head. His jugular vein, carotid artery, and trachea had been slashed, and he had defensive wounds on his hands. Alexander's death was ruled a homicide. On July 9, 2008, Jodi Arias was indicted by a grand jury in Maricopa County, Arizona, for the first-degree murder of Travis Alexander. She was placed under arrest at her home 6 days later, and extradited to Arizona on September 5. Arias pleaded not guilty on September 11. Arias gave different versions of what happened and about her involvement in Alexander's death. She initially told authorities that she had not been in Mesa on the day he was killed, and had last seen Alexander in early March 2008. Arias later changed her story, and told police that two intruders burst into Alexander's home, killing him, then attacking her. After 2 years, she again changed her story, saying that she killed him in self-defense, and saying she was a victim of domestic violence. The trial began in Maricopa County's Superior Court, with Judge Sherry K. Stevens residing. Jury selections began on December 10, 2012. During jury selection, on December 20, Arias' attorneys argued that the prosecution was systematically excluding women and Black Americans. Prosecutor Juan Martinez said that race and sex were irrelevant to his decisions to strike certain jurors. Stevens ruled that the prosecution had shown no bias in the jury selection. Opening arguments began on January 2, 2013. Martinez sought the death penalty. Arias was represented by appointed counsel, L. Kirk Nurmi, and Jennifer Wilmot, who argued that Arias killed in self-defense, and it was a justifiable homicide. Arias' co-worker, Burns, testified that when Arias visited him in Utah, the two had hugged and kissed for several hours on a large beanbag chair. She told him she had cut her hands on glass broken accidentally, while working at a restaurant called Margaritaville. A detective testified that no restaurant by that name had ever existed in the Wairika area. At the time, Arias worked at a restaurant called Casa Ramos. Prosecution argued that a .25 caliber round was found near Alexander's body, and that a gun of the same caliber was stolen from Arias's residence in Wairika the week before. Prosecution stated that she had staged the burglary and used the gun to kill Alexander. Martinez claimed that Arias stalked Alexander continuously and had slashed his tires twice. And in the final days before his death, Alexander had called her a sociopath and the worst thing that ever happened to me, and stated he was scared of her. Arias took the stand in her own defense on February 4, 2013. She testified for an unprecedented 18 days. On the first day of her testimony, Arias told of being abused by both parents, beginning when she was around 7 years old. She testified that Alexander was physically and emotionally abusive. She also claimed that when she killed him, that she had dropped the camera, and he became extremely angry and abusive, and she feared for her life. She claimed that she had to fight for her life. This was the third version of what Arias said happened that day. This damaged her credibility. Several of Alexander's friends and ex-girlfriends testified that he never showed any signs of anger or violence. Beginning on March 14, psychologist Richard Samuels testified for the defense for 6 days. He stated that Arias was more than likely suffering from acute stress at the time of the murder. That this forced her body into a fight or flight mode to defend herself, which caused her brain to stop holding memory. In response to a juror's question, asking whether this could occur, even if this was a premeditated to murder, as the prosecution contended, he responded, "Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? No." Samuels also diagnosed Arias with post-traumatic stress disorder. Martinez attacked Samuels' credibility, accusing him of forming a bond with Arias and being biased. Samuels had previously testified under oath that he had compassion for Arias. Starting on March 26, Alice LaViolette, a psychotherapist who specializes in domestic violence, testified that Arias was a victim of domestic abuse, and that most victims do not tell even their closest friends about abuse, because they feel ashamed and humiliated. LaViolette summarized emails from Alexander's close friends. "They have basically advised Ms. Arias to move on from the relationship, that Mr. Alexander has been abusive to women." The jury asked nearly 160 questions to LaViolette, with the majority of them addressing the credibility of Arias. Clinical psychologist Janine DeMart testified on behalf of the prosecution, stating that she found no evidence that Alexander had abused Arias, and no evidence of PTSD or amnesia in Arias. Also, Arias claimed complete memory loss for long stretches of time. DeMart testified that this was inconsistent with traumatic amnesia associated with PTSD, which manifests as much smaller gaps in memory. Instead, DeMart said Arias suffered from borderline personality disorder, showing signs of immaturity and an unstable sense of identity. People who suffer from such a disorder have a terrified feeling of being abandoned by others, DeMart told jurors. The last defense witness was psychologist Robert Geffner, who said that DeMart's borderline diagnosis was not appropriate, and that all tests taken by Arias since her arrest pointed toward an anxiety disorder stemming from trauma. He also stated that the tests indicated that she answered all questions honestly and without lying. Following Geffner's testimony, the state recalled Horn, who testified more on the gunshot wound, and called Jill Hayes, a forensic neuropsychologist, who disputed Geffner's testimony that the MMPI test was not geared toward diagnosing borderline personality disorder. In closing arguments on May 4, Arias' defense argued that the premeditation theory did not hold water. What happened in that moment in time? The relationship of chaos, that ended in chaos as well. There is nothing about what happened on June 4th, in that bathroom that looks planned. Couldn't it also be that after everything they went through in that relationship, that she simply snapped? Ultimately, if Miss Aries is guilty of any crime at all, it is the crime of manslaughter, and nothing more. In rebuttal, Martinez described the detail and variety of Alexander's wounds. There is no evidence that he ever laid a hand on her, ever. Nothing indicates that this is anything less than a slaughter. There was no way to appease this woman, who just wouldn't leave him alone, he said. Aries' testimony added to a very lengthy defense portion of the guilt phase of the trial. This led to problems with retention of jury members. On April 3, a jury member was dismissed for misconduct. The defense team requested a mistrial. The judge denied the request. On April 12, another juror was dismissed for health reasons. A third juror was let go on April 25, after being arrested for driving under the influence. On May 7, 2013, after 15 hours of deliberation, Jodi Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder. After the conviction, the prosecution had to convince the jury that the murder was cruel, heinous, or depraved, in order for Arias to be eligible for the death penalty. The aggravation phase of the trial started on May 15, 2013. The one and only witness was the medical examiner, who performed the autopsy. Arias's attorneys, who had numerous times asked to step down from the case, gave only brief opening statements and closing arguments, in which they stated that the adrenaline rushing through Alexander's body may have prevented him from feeling much pain during his death. Prosecutor Martinez showed photos of the Alexander's body and the crime scene to the jury. Then paused for 2 minutes of silence, to demonstrate how long he said it took for Alexander to die at Arias's hands. After less than 3 hours, the jury determined that Arias was eligible for the death penalty. The penalty phase began on May 16, 2013, and resulted in a hung jury. The judge declared a mistrial for that phase of the trial. The jury had reached an 8-4 decision, in favor of the death penalty. After the jury was discharged, jury foreman Zavakos said in an interview that the jury found the responsibility of the weight of the death sentence was just overwhelming, but were horrified when it ended in a mistrial. By the end of it, we were mentally and emotionally exhausted, he said. I think we were horrified when we found out that they had actually called a mistrial, and we felt like we had failed. On October 21, 2014, Arias' sentencing retrial began. Testimony was given on both sides, then jury deliberations began on February 12, 2015. On March 2, 2015, the jury informed Judge Stevens that they were deadlocked. Arias' attorneys requested a mistrial. Stevens denied the request, read additional instructions to the jury, and ordered them to resume their deliberations. On March 5, 2015, Stevens declared a mistrial, because the jurors, who deliberated for about 26 hours over 5 days, deadlocked at 11-1 vote, in favor of the death penalty. The 11th jurors in favor of the death penalty indicated that the sole holdout juror was sympathetic to Arias and had an agenda. Sentencing was scheduled for April 7, 2015. Judge Stevens had the option to sentence Arias to either life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole, or with the possibility of parole after 25 years. On April 13, Stevens sentenced Arias to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. By March 5, 2015, Arias' trials had cost an estimated $3 million. Arias is serving out her time at the Arizona Department of Corrections, at Arizona State Prison Complex, in Perryville. What would drive a young woman to commit such a violent crime? Was it jealousy? Anger? A moment of insanity? Did she decide if she couldn't have him, then nobody can? What do you think? That concludes this episode. If you want more true crime, consider subscribing.